Welcome back for another breakdown. We're at the World Championships in the bronze medal of the 52 kilo where we have the current world number one in 2019 against Japan's number two. Okay, so we have the French player here in blue. Let's play this. We're looking at another Newaza technique. Japan's really starting to work here on top, trying to get that hand to go all the way across to the opposite collar. Starting to lift, trying to drive her over, get stuck, hops over. Love the persistency of the Japanese player, right? She's really going to work here, really working to pull her over. Oh, and you can see the frustration there from the French player, right? She must end up pinning her for a pone to end the match here. Yeah, she's already up by Wazari. She's 6 seconds into this pin. I'm pretty sure this would have secured her a bronze medal, no problem. Let's go back to the beginning and let's take a look here. So again, let's back this all the way up here. Let's back it up. There we go. So, there we go. Perfect. Ooh, let's move forward a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're right here into the beginning now. I don't know for certain if, the French player in blue has just done a drop seo or done something and the Japanese player is up. I would assume that they have just fallen down into this position and gotten here. And we talk about this all the time when we're talking about transitions, specifically in randori or in competitive settings where the speed matters. You have to transition quickly and efficiently, okay? You cannot allow your partner to just lock up and not give you anything. You have to be able to know, hey, when I do judo or when I'm competing, these are the grips that I find myself getting, and then we build our technique off of those grips, okay? I know when I was doing Newaza, there were certain techniques that I did specifically off certain moves, so I didn't have to really think about it. People would always ask why I don't do certain things over others. It's because I don't find myself there when I'm competing. But sometimes when I'm doing randori sessions, I end up doing it, but while I'm competing, they're not really in my repertoire as far as winning matches. Okay, so it's important to understand that distinction so that while you're working through these grips right here, and I love this technique. In the States, we call this a gut wrench because it systematically goes across a few sports. When you say gut wrench, everybody kind of understands this is what the technique should look like. But what you do is you send that right hand through to the opposite collar. You can either feed the skirt or you can go inside the jacket on the opposite side to grab nice and deep. I love this technique, especially for smaller, lighter players, just because they're strong for their size. So being able to lift and get that elevation, which we see the Japanese girl do in the first attempt. But as you start to crank the position, it also makes it difficult for the person on bottom to breathe, okay? So you're burning their lungs, you're making them flex and hold it, which can make it more difficult when we stand up for the next exchange in order to finish or do any tachiwaza, right? So even if the Japanese girl doesn't get the French player here, when they stand back up, the Japanese player will have more energy than the French player just because of this technique, okay? So a lot of times when you're working in Newaza, you have to think not only about, the chokes, the arm locks, and the pins, but also the effect that it's gonna have in the next exchange for tachiwaza. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why I like this technique. But right here, one of the things that the Japanese player does that's really good is she doesn't ignore the legs. Okay, a lot of people when they do this technique, they only work with the hands and they focus on getting the hands. But it's important to note that when you're in this position, you can see right here, she's gonna start going to work here with her feet, right? She's rocking, not because she's trying to turn her, but because she's trying to shift, okay? I refer to it as like shifting sand to see what comes available, right? Because as you start shaking your opponent's body just a little bit, things start to just open up because your partner's not gonna sure where they're going, left, right, forward, backwards. So you start playing these little micro defenses and you can feel these small little openings. You can get an extra inch of gi. You can get your hand a little deeper. You can get a foot inside, okay? So you can shift your partner and do these little bumps and motions in order to create openings inside your partner. And she does that really well. And that's what allows that foot to come through, right? Because this elbow right here is driving down so hard, this hand right here is elevating up the French player is starting to base out with this leg to get a counterbalance going, right? Because if she's starting to roll forward, she wants to put a weight way off of her so that she can't be rolled. But what happens when you do that is you allow this hook to come inside, and that's gonna fling her off to the side and hopefully start that rotation process for the Japanese player. So as we start to flow through here, right, she's still looking for that grip. And remember, we've talked about this in other Newaza videos where it's important that you work in stages on the ground, okay? Stage one for the Japanese player was get that hand inside, get the grip. Stage two for the Japanese player was get the hook inside. Stage three is gonna be hit an elevation and create motion and excitement so that the referee continues to go, okay? So as she starts to go, she starts hitting that next stage, right? She's starting to elevate, shake, turn, move. As we're starting to move through here, right there, boom, she gets that big explosive lift. She has both feet digging into the ground here, right? Foot one, foot two, all pushing off the mat so that we can lift all the way up and through the body and throw our opponent, okay? In a perfect world, she would have just pinned her right here, right? She would have just rolled over, girl would have hit her back, she would have laid on top, match would have been over. But we're talking about the world number one, and it's not that simple, right? So as she bellies out and turns, you have to keep going. You have to keep going. She gives it another lift, right? And she goes so far that she is almost laying on her side, right? On the back. They're almost like chest to back, but both laying on their sides in this position because she's throwing it so hard. The reason for that is because as long as the French player keeps building their base to their knees, you have to continue to throw their hip over. In order to go on to the next stage of the technique where you're not able to pin them and get the leverage, you need them belly down because you have to be able to shift over the top of them. And if you have to shift over their hips while they're up on their knees, they're gonna bump you off every time. You're never gonna be able to make that leap over. So she keeps throwing her, keeps throwing her, makes a huge commitment to the ground, and right there, the French player commits to the belly, okay? And that's where she goes wrong in this position. You can't ever commit to your belly. You have to build your base to your knees almost instantaneously because, see, she tucks it right here. She's tucking her knee. No, you need to be up off the floor because the higher you can get your hip, the higher the Japanese player has to go. And I understand it's like a battle here, right? Like every time you come up on your hips, Japanese player is going to throw you again, right? You get up on your hips, you're going to throw you again. But as long as you can keep creating that never-ending loop, the referee will eventually call mate. You never want to go belly down from this position because it allows her to spin and come all the way over to the other side and able to create more leverage, right? So, right, look at that. She's just walking right over the top. Walking right over the top. We teach this to a lot of the kids because they have a little bit more dexterity in their upper body and in their shoulders, right? Bigger guys, stronger guys, guys with broader shoulders would struggle with this because getting to the other side, it would be a lot of torque on the arm. But at the lighter weight classes or people who are a little bit longer, you can create so much leverage and pressure on the chest from this position that it's worth having in your arsenal, even if it's not all the time. I would do this to players just because I'm trying to burn their stomach. I'm not letting them breathe. I'm gonna make them flex and engage. You can see here that Bouchard has this hip turned down into the mat hard. She's pushing off this foot, trying to drive everything in this direction because the Japanese player is going off in the other direction here, right? She's turning that hip in. Japanese player is fighting against it. And what's happening is that all of that is sitting on the French player's core and chest, and it's getting hard to breathe, okay? So as we start working through here, right there, you can just look at this torque, right, in the arm, right? Let's just highlight this really quick, and let's just look at this position right here, where, look at that twist in that arm. That's that lack of flexibility that you see at some of the like upper weight classes for male and female, right? A lot of the lower weight classes, they'll have a little bit more dexterity in their arms and shoulders to be able to pull this off. But when you do, there's just so much leverage and torque inside that position that you can create this opportunity where all the weight for everybody, right, the Japanese player and the French player is living down here. Oop, let's go back. Is living right through this section right here. So she's able to use this top side arm here to start yanking and shifting her back. You're gonna see her feet start to shift back to try to inch her over piece by piece until the ref calls Hara-Zutsumi. So as we start working, right, there's 1 inch. See how she slid her? Sliding, sliding, sliding. She goes back down. Keep going, keep going. You can see that this top side hand, right? It's starting to go to work. It's starting to pull, pull, pull. Remember that shifting sand. You're just trying to shift little bit by little bit. Show action to the referee that you're gonna get her, right? And then they'll just let it keep going. So as we're moving through here, right, moving, 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 and right there, it ends, right? Right here, I'm sure the ref is like getting that hand ready to call Hara-Zutsumi, and we're moving along. And you can kind of see here at the end, right, the frustration inside the French players where she's come into the World Championships as the world #1, right? You can just see it on her face, like her hands brushing her eyebrows. She can't believe where she is. She's about to finish 5th. But it's just kind of like a conceptual thing that I want you to know is judo works as like an ecosystem. Some techniques work in some situations just because of the way the match is flowing or because of the mental state of the person you're doing it to, right? So if we take a look at the French player here who is world #1, look, if we look down here, right, at the scoreboard, she's down by Wazari. There is 10 seconds on the clock, right? So she knows going into this Newaza exchange that is now taken probably 20 seconds to get through. Like if she stands back up, like how much is she really fighting? And how much is she just like, even if I stand back up, like I've lost this match. Okay, so a lot of this technique could be just a mental lapse in judgment just because of where we are situationally in the clock. Not to say that that's the case for this particular exchange, but just pay attention to those types of things, right? A lot of times when you see big judo highlight throws, pay attention to where the clock is, because if that person's down by Wazari and there's 10 seconds to go, they're probably charging, throwing caution to the wind, and then they get caught, right? So you have to take those things into account when you're looking at video breakdowns. And I just want to point out that there's short time on the clock. She's already losing. She feels the clock getting burned away, and then she ends up getting pinned, right? How much of that was mental, how much of that was the Japanese player's technique is probably a little bit of both, but it's still a solid technique that you should be paying attention to and probably have in your arsenal if you are a lighter weight or longer style player.